Which Side Podcast is a proud member of the Which Side Media Collective.
This week's episode is sponsored by a t-shirt that you need to go and buy right now for $15. Yeah, so go to whichsidepodcast.com, click on the t-shirt, and get it. There's no other place you could go buy a $15 t-shirt that says Kropotkin on it. It just doesn't exist. It is a limited edition t-shirt, and we're not making any money off of it. It's like a Kickstarter thing where if we don't get enough pledges, then it won't be created. So we really need your help, and we're doing it for you. We want you to have this shirt. It's like a way to commemorate over 100 episodes. So please go check it out. It's awesome. It's limited edition. We'll never make it again. So get it. Whichsidepodcast.com. This is episode 101. Dalmatians. Anarchy 101. You do know that that's one of the few Disney movies that both parents are alive the whole movie. That was amazing. Yeah. Good for them. What the fuck's up, Disney? Trying to kill off parents? They have two sets of parents. They even have the dogs. Yeah. That's just a good movie all around. Who do we have on this week? Except for their purebred. We have Burst of Goodness on. Does a radio show called The Final Straw out of Asheville, FM. It's a weekly anarchist radio show, so totally check it out. They also have their back catalog available, like I think it was a week after. It's fucking amazing, you know, anarchists on the airwaves. We need more of it. What are the news and events this week? Yeah, so Burst of Goodness from The Final Straw said that they should have said Peter Gelderloos. He thinks that he's actually one of the few authors that he tries to reach out for his stuff. Oh, when we were talking about modern day authors. Yeah, it's a great talk. Stick around and listen to it. Also, in case you missed it, there's a Kropotkin t-shirt that is for sale. A motherfucking Kropotkin shirt. It's a shirt to commemorate the 100th episode of Which Side Podcast. You might even hate Which Side Podcast. Or Kropotkin. I'm actually not a huge Kropotkin fan. I find this shirt hilariously funny and awesome. And it's stylish. I would know. I didn't make it. Kropotkin did. But he did a good job. He did a good job. I sincerely hope you guys enjoy this episode. Whichsidepodcast.com.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side? Which side are you on? 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 Which side are you on?
Hello. How's it going, Liz?
Pretty good. How are y'all?
We're good. I'm Jordi. I'm Jeremy, by the way. Some people say they can't tell us apart, so hope you can.
You get a slightly higher register.
There you go. It's when I used to try to act like I could scream in a hardcore band, I had a very high register. Kind of like birds squawking, like Mike Ski. I don't know if you're familiar with Mike Ski.
Yeah. Okay. I'll use that to keep you both apart in my head.
Sweet. So, what have you been up to today?
Let's see. My partner ended up cutting himself in the kitchen that he works in, so I sat in an ER for a couple hours.
Oh no! Oh, shit! Is he okay?
Like spurting blood. Yeah, no, he's okay. It was just an uncomfortable morning, and but yeah, he's totally okay. He's got this crazy stuff. I should look it up online what it means exactly, but this hematopical gel foam thing that is like a little square of foam that they put into something that's an open wound that can't just be like sewn shut or glued shut.
So you said Gary Webb. The name doesn't strike me as familiar.
Well, I used to work for Project Censored, based out of the Bay Area, and one of the journalists that have been publishing in California under underreported things in general was this journalist Gary Webb, who was employed by the San Jose Mercury News, and in '96 he put out these 3 stories. Based on his research, he was drawing a line between early introduction of crack into Black and Latino communities in Southern California, the CIA funding of like death squads and right-wing military governments like the Contras in Nicaragua, and then former agents of the Contras, and I think also other like neighboring countries like Nicaragua or like El Salvador, for instance, in Guatemala, people who had been officials in either the military or in whatever junta being involved or maybe caught doing drug trafficking on the U.S. border, like bringing drugs into the country, but sort of getting given a bit of a waiver from the federal government. They're like, no, don't worry about it. They're fine. So these three reports came out. There's a new thing that's on the media today. I heard it on NPR when I was driving over here, and someone from The Intercept was getting interviewed by Bob Garfield about how it's just been unearthed that some CIA reports have basically come out recently talking about the strategy that they had to undermine Gary Webb's credibility, and sort of aiding other press, like other newspapers, in attacking Gary Webb's journalistic integrity, that eventually pushed him out of the game and maybe contributed to his suicide a couple of years later.
See, I'm familiar with his work. I just was unfamiliar with his name. That's sad.
Yeah. But kind of cool if finally it got released that, the CIA was involved in this stuff, and it sort of, makes me feel like less of a wingnut.
It's like those long suspected things that you finally find out, like, yep, I'm not crazy. Yeah. Like
fluoride, maybe not good. I don't know. Not going to go on that limb. How are y'all doing? How's your days?
I'm doing all right.
Doing pretty good.
I drove by the NSA surveillance building this morning, so that's fantastic.
Cool.
Yeah.
Did you wave?
I always wave, actually.
It is so weird. Every time that I pass that building, I feel so weird because what it is.
It's
It's
daunting.
there.
Yeah.
And like not a lot of people experience that, like driving by a fucking NSA building.
And it's not like when we say, I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of it, the one that's out here in Utah.
I think when it was being produced, I was seeing pictures of it.
Yeah, it's not like a small building. It's
massive.
Gigantic.
It's up the whole hillside.
It's half of like an entire mountainside.
I heard there was some water issues there for a little while.
Huge
attached to it, like
water issues. Yeah, because they're pulling in so much water to cool the servers that really, living in a desert, we don't have. Yeah.
Yeah, that was one way that someone was trying to shut it down, actually.
Yeah, but
it was denying them water access.
Yeah,
so that they would just overheat or whatever. That's really funny.
But since it's located on federal land inside of an army base, they kind of circumvented those requirements.
They could just deny water to the whole army base.
They should do.
Do you see my strategy? This is yes. Liberal reforms can make a difference.
So, how did you get involved in radical politics?
I grew up Roman Catholic, sort of. I kind of grew up Roman Catholic. I think we chatted about this in the car, maybe, or we were just talking about religion at one point. Basically, the summer camp that I used to go to was very much. It was fucked up, and actually, one of the founders of it was a priest who was found in the early 90s to have molested a lot of kids from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I was lucky enough to escape that myself. But the good things of the camp that I experienced were very much a liberation theology type direction, very much like attention to the beauty of the natural environment around us and our connections with it, and trying not to overtax it, and trying to like appreciate it as a product of, I don't know, God's wisdom or whatever. But that sort of started, I think, that's about my genealogy of radical politics, I think. And then in high school, I had some teachers that taught some good radical history, and that got me interested. We started doing anti-death penalty demonstrations in the Bay Area and going out to San Quentin and protesting, and it sort of led from there into conferences and like people bringing up side issues of like, it's not just this person being put to death by the state, it's also capitalism and racism and patriarchy. And that sort of was that was my introduction, I think, was probably that summer camp.
So when you said you had some good history teachers, were they the new breed of revisionist history teachers that were coming up? I don't know how old you are, so I don't know about what time frame that would be.
Mid-30s.
Okay.
Well, what was the description that you put on
like
the
revisionist
teachers?
histories, like Howard Zinn would be considered a revisionist.
Like Zinn
history.
influence?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I can think of at least one of the teachers in particular was very much, he had just gotten out of a master's program at San Francisco State, and he was very much into, I can't even remember. It was the reframing of history based around the people living in it. And so finding primary documents and the sort of ground level view, very much like Howard Zinn. Also, he was influenced by German like historical theories of Gemeinschaft and Gesellschaft in different like phases of human or of like the nature of society and how those societies function and how they view the participants within them and how they change, like post-industrialization. But yeah, he was very much about a lot of that ground level history, and also did a good job of, actually, I think one of the most important things was getting a lot of radical readings for us to discuss, to see what the ideas were that were pushing movements. So we like read Mussolini, we read Marx, and we read Che Guevara, and we read Sun Yat-sen, and like a whole bunch of other just contemporary writings or like theories or speeches that were influential at different points in history to sort of like round out and get sort of an understanding.
Do any of those
made me start reading stuff?
Oh, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
I was gonna say, do any of those like stick out in your mind today?
As far as readings that were interesting?
Yeah, like maybe still influential, either for or against, or just like really like stick in your mind. Because when I was introduced to the same thing by a history teacher in high school. She went off about how she hated the history book and why it was wrong, and and gave us these alternative readings. And there was a lot of it that still to this day just stick out in my head. Not that I necessarily, look at those for inspiration, but just because it completely opened my mind to how it can be different.
I think like not so much. It doesn't stick out in my mind as something that I positively think back and like that was an influential thing for me to read and something for me to aspire to, as much as. Like, honestly, like reading Mussolini's writing on like the foundations of fascism was really interesting for me. And it was, I think it's helped paint the way that I use that word when I, if I hear it thrown around, I'm like, actually, that's not corporatism, technical definition of fascism that Mussolini talked about. Like, that's about like probably the most interesting of those. I don't think there was anything that I read during that period of time, that really sticks out as inspirational, and something that I like carry with me still that I can think of off the top of my head, at least. What was it for you?
Oh shoot.
Haha.
Yeah, now you're putting me on the spot. Well, like for instance,
I've got a mic too.
Sorry.
the
the very first, it was like what grade would have been 10th grade? So like, was that your junior year in high school? Was when I had that history teacher, and she actually used Howard Zinn as that point of reference. So that was my very first point of reference. She went off about the history book, and she's like, this just teaches a European-centric view of history, and that's the wrong way of looking at it. And she goes, if you really want a real book, I'm not allowed to teach from it, but this is the book you should read, and held it up. And that day I went to the library and checked out People's History of the United States. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. So that to me, that is still very, very influential. And she really respected like being radical and free thinking, but she wasn't, if that makes sense. Like looking back on it, she wasn't very radical in herself. But she respected that aspect of people.
Yeah, it's like the high ideal of like we need a free and educated citizenry or whatever to operate a democracy. And the more of you, like, plurality is a really important thing. That's kind of how it was for my teacher too. I found out a few years later that he seemed super radical, but he was just about facilitating people growing in that direction if they wanted to, I think. Or he conservatized as he got older, which a lot of people do.
Yeah.
But I remember introducing myself like, hey, how's it going? I was in your class like 7 years ago. I'm an anarchist. Woohoo! And he's like, oh, God.
I hope that's not because of me.
Basically.
That just reminds me of I've told the story before, but I had a political ideology teacher in college, and when we went around and introduced ourselves, they were actually a communist, and I introduced myself as an anarchist, and they're like, that'll change.
You'll grow out of those material
You'll grow
conditions.
out of that. I grew out of that.
I took a political ideology class in college, and every time any leftist politics would come up, they would like talk about it, and it'd be like, Jeremy, is that really what you guys believe? I'm like, what the fuck?
You had to defend every moment of God.
And I'm like I'm not going to defend communism here. Like, yes, but and they could not grasp the different ideological standpoints of different forms of anarchism and the different takes on anarchist, theories and stuff. Like they're like, they couldn't grasp that there was differences.
We had
Was that just because this was in college?
Yeah, this was in college. It was a community college, to be fair,
Yeah.
so not very high thinking.
I mean, it's kind of not that surprising, I guess. I mean, we are we like pop into the media every once in a while, and you could, like, some people could quote Thoreau all day if they wanted to, but we're pretty peripheral, I think. We've had our historical moments, but when we have to point back to Spain 36 or certain elements in the Mexican Revolution or like the Russian Revolution, it's kind of having the stretch right there. We never cleared out a good 20% of the population of a country like communists did. So of course they're more recognizable.
Does that mean that they did it right?
No, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that, Pol Pot and Stalin and Mao are the kind of people that are going to make an impact on history, and people are going to like think about those names, not in a good way, thank goodness, but like anarchism is like, I think for a lot of people, anarchism is this utopic ideal that is never going to be reached, and we can be looked at positively as people who have such high standards and expectations of each other, but we're never going to do anything with that outside of like DIY culture. Or then you could look back to like the terrorist phase, the late 1800s, and like that's what anarchy was. So it's like, I think it's either like the Goofy Food Not Bombs Project or the bearded bomb thrower are the two main images that people think of when they think of anarchy, and they don't really think of theory,
Well, I mean, one of the fun facts I like to pull out for people was, and I could be slightly wrong on this, but there was an anarchist that tried bombing the Secretary of State in the early 1900s. And if I remember correctly, the bomb just went off before he opened the door.
Was that an attempted attack on Palmer?
I believe so. I'm kind of hazy on a lot of that old history stuff.
That's a lot of the. Have y'all seen No God, No Master?
I have not.
That came a couple years ago. It focuses around that sort of that event and the Galleanists, like Sacco and Vanzetti and like Galliani and other folks in the radical scene. And then there's also like IWW organizers like Flynn and Emma Goldman's in there and some other characters too. But yeah, it all focuses around the attempted assassination of Palmer and other influential Rockefeller and like other big names at the time.
I always feel really bad because I can't really get into Emma Goldman's writing, and for some reason I always feel really guilty about that.
I don't think you should. I absolve you of your sins.
Thank you.
You can walk away free and clean. You've been rebaptized. Yeah, I don't.
No Hail Marys?
I think no Hail Marys.
No Hail Marys.
Or that post Hail Mary phase. Yeah, me neither. I tried reading the autobiography and I just couldn't get drawn into it. Also, Kropotkin never did it for me. I think just a lot of the people around that area.
I'm really trying Kropotkin right now, and I've tried for years and have always put it down. but they just released Direct Struggle Against Capital, an AK, and I have it, and I'm like, I'm bound and determined to read this. I've read like a paragraph.
I mean, Andy sponsored our last episode.
Yeah, he
Who
did.
did?
Kropotkin? Yeah.
That's pretty impressive.
It was pretty. We were pretty shocked on that one.
We're his favorite podcast, apparently.
Damn
Sorry, no.
Oh no, that's fine. I'm post left, so it's not surprising that he wouldn't really like me too much. There was. Oh, have you all ever heard of the North American Anarchist Studies Network?
That sounds familiar. I'm drawing.
They do a conference every year. I think like one of the. Oh, sorry, what?
I think I know that there's the Institute for Anarchist Studies. Is that the same thing?
No, separate institution.
Okay.
NASN seems to be pretty decentralized and not really pushing like a specific ideology, whereas the Institute for Anarchist Studies is pretty much like, as far as I can read it, like anarcho-communist. Excuse me. But there's some of the people involved in that. Nathan Junn, I believe is his name, put out this regular magazine. It comes out like twice a year. It's called Anarchist Developments in Cultural Studies. And there was this one issue that came out earlier this year called Blasting the Canon. And it actually talks about like what makes someone an anarchist, like who gets to claim that mantle. Is it based on what they've read, on like which philosophers they can quote from? Because realistically, it poses the question of like, is anarchism a philosophy, or is it a tendency, or is it like a milieu, or what the differences are? I've never read a lot of the classical anarchists, and I'm probably never going to get around to it because their writing style just doesn't sit with me. I think that's totally okay, because as long as we have this like agreement of like, all right, those values about not being fucked up are pretty cool. I'm into that. If that makes me an anarchist, that's great.
And I'm right there too. Like I really haven't read a lot of the classical stuff, and I feel like a lot of it just doesn't relate to me currently. Like you can take a lot of the concepts that they say and apply into like modern society, but I think that it's 100 years old, a lot of that, or more, so I don't know.
Some of it really resonates with me, like The Capitalist System by Bakunin. Like that it still is so influential to me. I give it to people all the time. Like anytime I meet someone and that's their first, they don't know anything about anarchism, I give them that pamphlet to read.
I mean, maybe Bakunin's a different issue just because Bakunin was funny as fuck and also like went through so many weird phases at different points. Like, yes, Republican struggles, I support them, unite Italy. And then at other times, like hanging out with Nakayev and like talking about secret societies and whatever else, like conspiracy groups. And I don't know, but like God and State is a really easy, really good read, and with such quotes as "If God existed, it would be necessary to abolish him." That's such a good quote.
Oh, it's one of my favorite. Yeah,
definitely.
So, if you don't like the quote unquote classical anarchist authors, like, is there any modern day anarchist authors that you really look to?
Put me on the spot. I mean, I appreciate some of the writings that I've read from John Zerzan. I don't consider myself an anarcho-primitivist. Mm-hmm. I'm a green anarchist, but I don't know. I've really enjoyed what I've gotten out of what John's written, just as far as like concepts worth tumbling around in my head. That's a tough question. There's no like, I don't know of any authors necessarily that I'm like waiting for their next book to come out. Because so often, anymore when I read stuff, it's so frequently for the radio show specifically, and so there's got to be interest behind it. But also, I consider a lot of the reading to be, it's kind of okay. I'm going to study this. I'm going to write down questions. I'm going to do this sort of thing. What about y'all? Are there any authors that stand out?
Graeber for me, probably. I haven't read the Democracy Project, but Debt was very influential for me.
I've heard the audiobook of it, most of it. Mm-hmm. It's really long. It's really good, though.
Yeah, I've been meaning to get into Debt. Not into debt.
I can help you with that if you want. I'm sorry for all the dad jokes. Apparently, I'm on a dad joke kick. So,
No worries. I can't really think of anything myself. The last person that influenced me a lot, I'd have to say, was Quinn. But I've had such a falling out with Daniel Quinn as well. Like, it's just
because of our contact with him.
Well, not only our contact with him, but also just Beyond Civilization was not my cup of tea.
yeah, it was such a letdown by the end of it.
Yeah. So I mean, I can't really say.
I've actually
Have you read
never
any
read
James
him.
C. Scott?
What was that?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, I was just saying I've never read any of Quinn.
I think like Ishmael and that like
Story of B, My Ishmael.
yeah, Story of B. I've never read, but Ishmael and My Ishmael, I thought were both like fun reads, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
What's Story of B's deal? Because a friend of mine serialized it back in the community I used to live in and made zines out of every chapter, I think, and just distributed them.
It's got this like idea of that there's a person named B, but anyone can become B, that kind of whole thing. So like where you don't I don't know, it's been a second since I read it, but it brings it back to like you don't have to be anybody special. You can be the next B or whatever by following these steps.
Cool.
I can't really remember though.
B is a good person to be, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't.
And
It's
then
weird when you say it like that.
and it links to Ishmael only like once, where like B was talking about how they had an associate named Ishmael or somebody that they talked with. So it was, but aside from that, I think it was one of my favorites at the time. It goes into like a lot of after the story. It has like this long, probably about the same size as the book itself, about just discussing different issues that were brought up in B or in the story of B. So that was kind of interesting. But I still think I liked Ishmael and My Ishmael better.
So what's your critique on Beyond Civilization?
Yeah.
Like what took you away from that?
Me?
Yeah, like why did the previous work sit so well with you? Because I know Ishmael was very influential for you. You read that in your late teens, if I remember.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah,
And I think with Beyond Civilization, it was trying to push a bunch of ideas that just didn't really resonate with me. And like I said, it's been a second since I read that too, so I don't know. I forget things pretty easily, especially if I'm not that involved in them.
Mm-hmm.
But from what I remember, there was things like talking about how like a circus structure is set up, and then kind of creating society based on that. I just don't think that it was it wasn't ideal for everyone, and it considerably not ideal for myself. So I don't know. What you said you read that as well, Verse?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's been years since I read that. I probably read that in like 2005.
Yeah.
And again, I haven't revisited it because I didn't really enjoy it all that much by the end of it. I was just let down by the argument that that we could reform our way out of the way that civilization is, and also this sort of civilization can be better. And I guess it's all into what definition one's using for civilization when you argue that. But yeah, it was specifically like, no, there can't be like a clean break. There's no room for revolution or uprising or what have you to sort of change the power relations. You have to change people's hearts. And I really don't have much faith in that myself. I mean, I think like changing people's hearts is great, but I don't think that the people that operate this system around us and above us are going to be talked out of the power that they have.
I mean, I can't remember who originally read saying this, but I've kind of always felt this way. There's a certain segment of a population that will change based on, an educated choice. And then there's a certain segment of population that will have to be forced to change based on either that choice not existing or physical force. And I've really held pretty much true to that.
With the possibility that there is like a good portion of the population that can be talked into alternatives. Yeah,
I mean, so like if you're talking about like a basic anarchist, or civilization, it would be kind of like we're all anarchists, so we've made that choice already. But then you would have to, take away that choice from other people in order for them to be on board.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I guess where I'm coming from is yeah, I think, I mean, I'm definitely into like people having conversations with other folks and like saying like, well, this is what I believe and this is why I believe it. Like, what do you think? Let's see how we can like, what do we both have in common? What are our shared perspectives and critiques, and like, where can we go with that? What kind of change can we make? Mm-hmm. But I don't think that I don't think you can make like ecological arguments at the military and they're going to say like, oh, actually we are the biggest polluter in the world. Like, let's abolish ourselves. And, what, the military is going to do what the military does.
Yeah.
And they are so ingrained and they've like gone through boot camp and then they retrain themselves and they're multi-generational too. And so you've got this centralized ideology that is reproduced and reified throughout the experience of military existence, that for them to expect them to do anything other than look for military solutions to any sort of problem, it seems like waiting on rain in the desert. Like, maybe it'll come, but it seems like a change of terrain would make more sense. Do you know what I mean? Like, but yeah, I think that you can totally change people's minds otherwise. Is it also, is that worth doing necessarily? Like, how much conversation do we need to happen until the rainforests are gone, or until all the wild horses have been rounded up and killed, or what have you?
Yeah, I kind of view it like, you can convince a certain segment of the population not to buy Minute Maid because, they contribute to rainforest destruction. But the vast majority of people that purchase Minute Maid will only stop when Minute Maid doesn't exist anymore. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's...
So hopefully you convince enough people to do it by themselves so that they can do an uprising to force a change without the other people. But I've always heard that you can get radical change in a society by a relatively small percentage, anywhere from like 10 to 15% of a population fighting for an ideal can change the landscape.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah, small percentage, but a lot of people.
Or just a couple of your city council members. Just kidding.
So if they're 1%ers, like, how many of those do you need? Because, like, I don't know if we're talking about... Never mind. See, that was a bad attempt at a dad joke. Anytime I bring up Occupy lingo, you just shut me down, please.
Just shut you down. I really, get dissuaded by that whole 1%er talk, personally. Mm-hmm. Anyways, I don't know if I really want to...
What about it? Oh, okay, yeah, we don't have to. It's still a bruised area for a lot of us, I'm sure.
It's the idea that, that they're the only source of the problem. And you're like, well, no, then there's also the top 5%. And fuck those 4% too. And what about the top 10%? Fuck them too. Like, it's not just this problem. It's the idea of how it's organized that allows them to get there, and the idea that you're sold that you can achieve that also. That's the problem. Mm-hmm. It just seems like it's focusing on the wrong thing to me.
Well, when the values are about like accumulation and the system perpetuates itself based on like profits from people just interacting and engaging in business for the sake of business. Like when I get emails from eBay saying like, oh, like you should totally sell your used phone and we'll send you money. Like, why do they want me to sell my used phone? I don't have a used phone, but if I did, like even a flip phone, they're going to give me $100 to use their service to sell something. Like, that's how much they feed off of the requirement of just like consumption and exchange and trade, and like the whole system's so sick and so focused on eternal expansion that it's, I don't know.
Well, and
it's more than just 1%.
Yeah, that eternal expansion is all based on something that's fake to begin with. I mean, wealth in and of itself is fake, and a lot of people have a hard time grasping the concept that, you know, currency in of itself doesn't really exist.
Yeah, but the food it buys is. You know.
Yeah, I know. It sucks.
Yeah, it's this funny like public secret myth thing that everyone holds on to.
I was trying to explain it to my wife the other day, and she's like, I don't get it. What do you mean? Like, at one point, currency had a value, but now it doesn't have. I'm like, this is way too much conversation to have in a 5-minute drive right now.
Was it like the whole like silver backing, gold backing?
That's where
discussion?
it started with her, but she really was questioning why rates of inflation happen, why it happens differently now than it happened 100 years ago.
Mm.
Yeah.
I think it's still.
Do you want to?
Oh, go for it.
Was that?
No. Go ahead.
No, you're saying a question.
Oh,
about
I was
it?
asking if I was going to ask if you were if you wanted to go into that why the rates of inflation are different than they were 100 years ago, because I have no idea why they would be. Besides the fact that markets operate in a different way, like internationally, I guess.
Well, yeah, I mean that's part of it. I'm by far no goddamn expert, so I mean I hate to spew this out there in the universe when my understanding of it could be way off base and wrong. So yeah, but I mean, from my understanding,
it's basically the lizard people, right?
Yeah,
that's why. Okay,
yeah, basically
Illuminati, NWOs.
Yeah, cool.
But if you want to do more research into it, it has to do with a lot of like what you were saying, like the precious metal backing, where that kept inflation in line because there was a solid line where you couldn't just print more money. With the idea that you'd have to gain something before you could print it. You'd actually have to gain more of that, quote unquote, precious metal, which in itself has a fake value. That's a whole nother discussion. So
it's a simple logic that works for World of Warcraft. Why can't we just reinstitute it in our daily lives?
So you're saying you classify yourself as a green anarchist, and
Mm-hmm.
I've never been comfortable calling myself a green anarchist, mainly because it's associated so much with primitivism for me. What brought you towards green anarchism? Like, what does that mean to you?
Well, I think, like I was saying earlier, the probably just the camp that I went to being a really serious break from my normal suburban life growing up, and being an opportunity to, even for just a week, surround myself with nature and sort of do a lot of thinking and meditation on like what my relationship with nature was. And the time that I would spend up there at that camp, like some of it was the programming and like being around other kids, and most of that was stressful, but I sort of was able to build I never did like Boy Scouts or anything like that. That was my opportunity to sort of figure out that I felt much more balanced and much more like stabilized if I had the opportunity to go out and like sit among some trees for a little while, if nothing else. So that like those early days of camping were a big building of affinity for being out in the woods. I don't know. As I got older, well, in college, reading about climate change, reading about peak oil, taking anthropology classes, and sort of seeing like, wow, there's so many different ways to do this thing that we're doing. Some people do it way different and put values in different like facets of their lives. Mm-hmm. I don't know exactly what did. I think getting a hold of Green Anarchy magazine was helpful because it was just so full of so many different ideas and so many perspectives, and it wasn't some like unified theory. It was sort of all over the place with just like general thematics of critiquing civilization, society, agriculture, domestication. As far as the anarcho-primitivism part, I guess I don't like tend towards that, because I think that the writings of anarcho-primitivists, while like in a lot of cases very well educated and very like well researched, should be looked at as like sort of like potential guiding principles, or like viewed in a way that these are like, through these studies we've found that like people have lived in this way or thought about the quote unquote resources that they're using or living with, or the other animals around them. And I guess like if I called myself an anarcho-primitivist, I would feel like I would need to fully engage with that, and that would be my sort of like mantra, would be anarcho-primitivism. But I think that I don't know. I'm blathering right now is what I think I'm doing.
Well, when you brought up Green Anarchy, the magazine, I just remembered I have a bunch of old copies of that stashed somewhere.
It was entertaining. It was like super funny and snarky, and maybe a little bit too snarky sometimes, but with like Waldorf and Statler, two characters from the Muppets that would just snark.
I remember.
Do you remember that?
Yeah, and I remember I had some correspondence with Kevin Tucker around the same time I had all that, and honestly, he kind of dissuaded me from a lot of it.
Oh, just the personal relationship that you had?
It wasn't like really. It wasn't like a personal relationship. It was just some correspondence back and forth. Me trying to get more information on basic primitivism and why should I be interested or not be interested going down that route. And his explanations to me just seemed I might get myself in trouble.
Moving on.
Yeah. They just didn't sit well with me.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think like just to kind of cap that off, I guess what I was trying to get to with the anarcho-primitivism part is that I think it could be taken in a very prescriptive manner, and I don't really think that. I think it's a good thing. Like I think Mr. Zerzin's writings, for instance, are like super thoughtful and super well researched, as I said. But don't take them as gospel, just like I wouldn't take anything else as gospel. So I don't specifically identify as a primitivist. But green anarchism, on the other hand, is a much larger umbrella that doesn't hold to like necessarily specific teachers or central thinkers to it. It's just a tendency within anarchism that focuses on like the question of what is civilization, what does civilization do, and how to disengage from that, and what might exist otherwise.
So being a green anarchist, can you answer those questions for me?
Hell if I know. I don't know. It just sounded cool, so I said it. I mean, I think that the way that I think I need to stop staring at the screen because it's distracting me. So I think for the majority of our existence as a species, we've lived in relationships with the land base around us, with ourselves, and with the other animals around us in a way that maybe not across the board has been sustainable. People have experimented in all sorts of places and lived in all sorts of different ways. But I feel like there is a resultant alienation that you can measure in our lives now. And our lives are speeding up because of technology and because of capital basically wringing more activity out of us and monetizing that activity. And I don't think that anxiety and that alienation is something that's inherent to humans. I think that if you look back to earlier times when we had less mediation between each other and also between the labor that we were outputting, if you want to use that term, and like what we were getting for sustenance. I think that the way that capitalism and property have developed is a product of civilization, and they've been tools holding hands with each other the whole time. I think that patriarchy is a product of civilization. I think people caring about like who fucks who, as long as it's consensual, like I think policing of people's sexuality basically is a product of religion, which, probably the first paid employees anywhere, the first paid positions to exist in society were probably religious, like priests or shamans or whatever. I think that if you don't look at the foundations of civilization and the assumptions that are inherent in it, that any attempt at a liberation will be incomplete, if even a complete liberation is a possibility in the future.
So,
I think it's unfair to the animals. I think it's unfair to the land base, and it's unfair to us.
So you believe that capitalism itself is an inherent quality of civilization, not just right now just a byproduct of civilization?
I think that I don't think that capitalism isn't inherent. I misspoke if I said that. And I'm sort of like winging it right now, so I'm not like working off of some like theory paper that I'm writing or something. I think that capitalism is a product of civilization. It developed, and how it's existent right now, or how we experience it in the United States in particular, as opposed to how one would experience the mediation of capitalism through social democracy in Northern Europe, for instance, or in Africa, the lack of mediation of capitalism, I guess, in most countries there. Capitalism is coming out in the ways that are acceptable and applicable within the United States. Capitalism is a byproduct of civilization. Civilization does not necessarily lead to the construction of capitalism, although it seems pretty tandem, right? It seems like it fits well into what I consider to be kind of the logic of centralization and the building of hierarchies. The limitation of people's access or animals' access or whatever to lands that would allow them to be self-sustaining. The parcelization of the parcelizing of like elements of our lives into little independent squares, little independent blocks that can be. Now I'm on a rant. I don't even know where I'm going with that. But I think that it's not inherent to civilization. Civilization existed before capitalism, which has only been around since the late 1700s. But it's bad. Capitalism's bad. If you can take one thing from this rant.
See, like I'm on board with like almost everything you're saying, except I look at like what basic civilization has brought in, and I look at some of the positive aspects of it, minus like capitalism, and I'm like, why can't we take the positive from basic civilization and then create our own positive, perfect civilization? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't think humans can do anything that's perfect. Like, perfection is an idea. It's an abstraction. I also don't think that like. I mean, that's just me mincing words or whatever.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not, when I say perfect, I don't literally mean everything's perfect, but I mean, as close to it as, we should always be striving for, something better, improving our standing in society a little bit better, improving everyone just a little bit better. That's what I mean.
I think the standards that we're judging by are standards that we've learned in the society that we're living in right now. So when we talk about, like, if we're thinking about poverty, for instance, why should inequality exist when there's no civilization? Like, there might be like these people over here that are sitting on top of, they have a river running right through their village or whatever, and they're, pretty comfortable with their access to water. And then someone else, like other group of people over here that don't have as easy access because of where they decide to settle most of the year. Like there's nothing stopping those two communities from exchanging ideas or like intermingling or living on the same river necessarily or what have you. Like, I think that if we're going to think about technologies, there's a lot of trade-off that goes into the technologies that we use and that are accessible to us. And a lot of that trade-off, like besides like us becoming anxious because we're always getting updates on our Facebook and if the phone's just going off in our pocket all the time because we're on Facebook because we really need to be on Facebook everywhere we are, don't want to be disconnected. Like, besides just the anxiety that creates in us and this whole carrot stick thing of us working to get new technologies because we have to be up to date, there's the question of the wars being fought in Central Africa, the poaching of heavy metals, or like the forcing of people to dig out these heavy metals that are horribly dangerous to dig out, the refining of those things, the shipping of those over to Asia so that, people in factories can make smart screens out of some of these heavy metals so that we can have a smartphone in our pocket that dings us every time there's a notification on Facebook. Like, that's kind of a crass response on my part, but I think that the trade-off that we experience in a lot of ways is like an emotional, psychological thing. Whereas for those technologies to be necessary at this stage, at least, or at least profitably extracted, it requires there to be civil wars in in Africa, and child laborers and people dying of asphyxiation and not having good working circumstances because their government in China doesn't give a fuck about them because they're not influential party members or members of the new elites. It's I don't know. It seems it's okay. It's also bad, like capitalism. It's bad.
Whenever I have these conversations, it makes me go back to my basic teetering behind like either syndicalism or more green tendencies.
That's why I always throw green tendencies on.
You always throw them together. It's like I feel like I live like in this weird borderland, almost right in between the two, and I don't feel like I know enough about either side, I guess you could say, to really form a solid footing.
I think I don't know. Ideas are cool to play with, like, and we're never going to be ready enough. But I think like some disciplined play with ideas is a fun thing for the brain. Are there any like specific people that like fall within? I mean, we've discussed like certain classical anarchist writers. Are there any like contemporary anarchist writers that you think try to fuse those two tendencies of like greener stuff and like sort of like a Bookchin-y or?
Well, I've seen some things on like the Anarchy, which kind of combines a lot of like elements of veganism and anarchism and green anarchy, and I've even seen some anarcho-syndicalism thrown in there. But like I haven't seen like a lot of things that are like
I've never seen, and if you know of any, let me know. But I've never seen anything where there's a real kind of crossover or blend or critique of the two against each other.
There's definitely like a large ecological focus present in the stuff that was coming out of the Institute for not anarchist studies, although there too, but like the socio-ecology movement that Bookchin was a part of. And that Cindy Milstein, I think, is still associated with. And Cindy, I believe, is involved in the Institute for Anarchist Studies. I've known a few people that have been involved in that. There was like a book that they put out by Raul Setnes Castro that was talking about climate change and justice and state formations. And one of the arguments he made as to what would be an immediate solution people could like, or action people could take, would be going vegan, and like listed off a bunch of statistics about agricultural lands used and resource input and things like that. But that was, I don't recall the name of that book, but it was interesting, I guess. But yeah, I guess like whether it's kind of hard to find a synthesis perspective when it's people fighting for different positions, like whether it's like, no, we want to run our workplaces and like federate the distribution of labor and distribution of wealth. And then other people are like, no, I want to go hide in the woods. Please just leave me alone.
See, and like that's, I feel like what's so like confusing both for me. Yeah. It's like, I almost feel like one's a stepping towards the other kind of, and maybe that's, just me being naive, but, I feel like if we can, organize the workers and federate the workplaces and go that way, then it will open up to be more so you can actually live more at one with nature and not have to, worry about this current system we're in.
I guess, yeah, it doesn't, it makes me recall the whole argument of like prisoners organizing themselves, or let's say not prisoners, let's say like folks in a mental health facility. No, that's because that's derisive, like the way that that's used. But like, yeah, okay, prisoners, people in a prison taking over the prison and administrating it more democratically it's still a prison. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's kind of how I feel about the way that I live with the world right now, is like, I don't want a commissar coming by and telling me that I have to work this many hours for this much food credit or whatever. I'd rather not talk in terms of planned economies. I'd rather talk about allowing the world to sort of, I guess, how do we wean ourselves off of the technologies that we use, and how do we learn how to directly be, maybe, I guess, like, if you're organizing the workers to stop production and then deindustrialize and like abolish themselves, like that kind of thing, basically, kind of, I don't know. It kind of feels, go ahead.
When you use the term technology, like, what does that mean to you? Because I've talked to some people and they're, they give dates, and then some people, they're like, well, it's any form of domestication.
Like spoons and...
Yeah.
I think a tool is a tool, and like a tool is how you use it oftentimes, but I think that technology is a relationship.
Okay.
Basically. Like the technologic it's not like what that spoon is just a thing, like until you put it to use. But with something like computers, they were developed for the purpose of managing people and managing resources. That's kind of what it's there for. That's the logic that underpins its existence. And the logic of God, now I'm going to sound like an idiot. You totally put me on the spot with that. It's a good question.
Well, and like this is the question that has, dissuaded me from primitivism to begin with, because I'm all about, a less technological centric lifestyle. But when you get to the point where it's like, I can't, forge a shovel to plant a crop, and planting a crop before I can feed myself, that in itself is wrong. I don't get the steps behind that. You know what I mean?
Well, it's not the only way to make a shovel anyway, but
what I mean. But a lot of people will say any way of, utilizing anything as a tool is the domestication, and that shouldn't happen.
I don't think so, because if you're self-domesticating by using a tool. Yeah. Seems kind of silly to me as an argument.
Me too. That's what I'm saying.
But I think that there's lots of workarounds for your shovel quandary. And I will say that like hopefully, ideally, you wouldn't have to be doing that alone.
No, I would agree.
It's not like this idea. There's this idea that like when shit hits the fan or whatever, we're all going to be like individualist, like survivalists living up on our own mountains with our own shotguns and our own, cans of Spam or whatever. And I don't think I think there's all sorts of different community solutions that can come to a community of, okay, we're having a dry season. How do we figure out how to get food for the year? Like, do we move to another place? Do we become semi-nomadic and wander a little bit in a direction that seems to be following herds of animals, or where I know of like a waterfall that we can hang out next to and figure out our bearings from there? Or do we communicate with another community of people over there and say like, hey, do you all have surplus possibly, or have any ideas for it? Like, I think it's like, yeah, I understand, like without a division of labor too, you would still have the same problem of not being able to, like, I'm probably not going to go out and dig the ore and then smelt it and then forge it into a shovel all by my lonesome. It's probably not going to happen.
Yeah, you could also forge a shovel from a tree pretty easily with a rock sitting next to you and make a pretty decent tool, to help plant.
Yeah, that's true.
And see,
you could.
And like my whole problem is like, I look at that and that to me is pretty damn primitive if you ask me, but you talk to other primitivists and they're like, no, that's technology. And like, that's where I'm also like, when you make that connection, it kind of just makes me step all the way away.
Mm-hmm. I think, yeah. I mean, if you're searching for some sort of like purity, you're gonna run up against arguments that don't make any sense, because we can make any number of arguments that you could pose to someone who's taking a position that eventually will make them sound ridiculous. But I am personally not of the opinion that making a shovel is an inherently alienated activity. You can quote me on that.
I can quote you on that. It's just, maybe I've talked to some very, like you said, purist almost when it comes to that. And that's kind of what's formed my opinion.
Well, what I take issue with a lot of times is just the the stance of like, what do we do with people with mental illness, or they should just die, or what do we do with elderly? They should just die.
Oh, we had a huge problem. Not problem. We had a huge conversation at the Which Side Rendezvous, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And personally, I don't think that that's a solution.
No, me neither. I think a lot of the way that, and I'm sure some people are going to take what I'm saying in a way differently than what I'm meaning to say it as, but I think a lot of what's considered to be mental health issues is a byproduct of the lifestyle that we're in, and also all the chemicals that are going into our bodies, and the mixtures of like the over drugging of people for like ADHD, you know, for instance. But I think there's a lot of things that are exacerbated by the way that our society operates, in a way that mental health is going to look a lot different if we're living in a deindustrialized community, or if we ever did. And I think that also, like, what elderly folks, are you talking about like during a collapse or something like that, or just like after just they're going to get old and they're going to die?
People that need additional help where they can't take care of themselves. Yeah.
You're going like they each their own according to their need or whatever. Is that what you're talking about?
Just whatever. Like sometimes it's like, you know, if somebody needs, you know, medication or something like that, or if they need support because they can't do things themselves because they're living on their own.
Or if somebody falls and paralyzes and, you know, falls and breaks their back and gets paralyzed, are they just SOL?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I think like a lot of people are social animals and have taken care of each other for millions of years. There's that whole, the elder who is like at least in his 60s, I think he was older than that, but he was found up in the Alps frozen, and they dug him out and they like looked at his body and they're like, oh, he's had a couple of like, no, that's a different one. No, he had like one of them
had like an arrow, right? And he was fleeing. They could prove that he was fleeing from like an attack. Is that the one you're talking about?
Not. Maybe that's a different element of it than I remember. What I remembered was that he obviously had been taken care of for a long period of time, and he had some like he was differently able than what would be assumed to be like the quote unquote normal, which showed signs of like A, medical treatment by people around him, and B, that like people invested enough in having this human being alive, despite the fact that they had to like put in more effort and time and energy and maybe like sort of cater to him a little bit more, because he wasn't able to be as mobile and independent. Like I think that people like take care of people. People take care of family members. It's not necessarily easy. And there's the technical issues of like what happens if we can't sustain this person's life into their 90s. I mean, I don't know. I think if people can work out ways to, again, not trying to come from an ethical standpoint or whatever, but there's lots of different modalities of healing, and not all of them are the method of healing that we use in America. That's the mainstream system of medicine. Is allopathy was like developed literally as battlefield medicine. It was meant to deal with sutures and broken bones and like amputations and stuff like that. And it's not about sustaining the health of the individual. Whereas integrating in like more herbs and changes in diets and paying attention to how our bodies function naturally as a system that sustains itself. I think that we're less likely to we're more likely to prevent things like cancers from developing.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say our current medical system it's 100% reactionary. There's not much focus on preventative.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and or just sustaining like healthfulness, whatever healthfulness looks like.
Yeah. So it kind of sounds like you don't fully get on board with people like Zinn on language and art and things like that. Would that be correct?
Well, as far as where John is right now with language and art, the last time that I talked to him for my radio show was concerning, I forget exactly what it was. It was during the anniversary, like my show's anniversary, and so I interviewed a bunch of different people that do radio or podcasts. And one of the questions was around like, so let's talk about the inherently alienated form of radio. You've got someone talking into a microphone from this centralized position, and then it's just dispersed as this godlike voice coming out of boxes and other places. And he's like, actually, he thought I was attacking primitivism to a degree because he's heard so many times over the years that like people attacking his arguments about symbolic logic that he stated pretty like heavily at one point, and he's said since that I've sort of like not taking that position anymore because I've rethought it and new stuff has come to light for me. I don't think he has the same strong stance that people expect of him as he used to. I think that thinking about symbolic logic and thinking about language and thinking about number systems is really important. It's really important, and it's really good to just meditate on these very simple things that we take as rote, as just like, oh, we're humans, therefore these things exist. Mm-hmm. Sort of think about like how we interact with them and what power we give those ideas. You can do it for God if you want to. You can say like, okay, well, let's look at this idea that people are willing to live and die for, that they've ingested in their, like, it has a specific cultural context for them and also like an individual relationship. But like assuming an atheist stance right now, which I'm not an atheist, but like if an atheist looks at somebody having a devout relationship with God, you're like, what are you doing? You're talking to a wall. There's no one there. It's an idea that you're trying to dialogue with, and that doesn't really work. So I think studies around symbolic logic and how we reify or how we make a thing out of an idea or a ghost or a spook or whatever is pretty interesting. But that said, I'm not going to like promote people getting frontal lobotomies so that they or cutting off the speech portion of the brain or whatever.
It's interesting that you brought up God and atheism. One of the things that I've been like looking into and want to look more into is the idea that atheism is a construct of Judeo-Christian theology, and that Eastern cultures can believe in something different than what we would consider a God, but still be atheists. I think the most famous would be like the Dalai Lama actually calls himself an atheist.
Well, I guess because the Buddha isn't a god, right?
Yeah. So I mean, like if you look at like Taoism it inherently doesn't believe in what we would consider a god in like the Christian sense.
There's just the path. There's the way.
Yeah.
I think I can definitely see that in a lot of like that's why I shy away from like self-describing as an atheist, is because not because I have like concrete ideas, but I see it as being like reactionary, and it's like if I defined as a Satanist, I'd be, except for as like a philosophical Satanist, I kind of understand, but like a practicing theological Satanist, I think that's really silly. I think it's really silly to like worship this like, oh, well, we don't like your God, so therefore we're gonna take the shitty like underling who got kicked out and lost the war. We're gonna take him and raise him up on a pedestal and worship him, and he's gonna be more badass than you. And we're gonna have more red capes than your cardinals or whatever. Like, it's just really, you can't think of anything better to do than just use their symbols and just invert them. It's just silly.
It is funny a lot, though.
Yeah.
So you say you're not an
pitchforks
atheist.
And
what does that mean to you? Like, it doesn't sound like you believe in a like the construct of a monotheistic God either.
No, I guess if I were, I'm not practicing as woo anything these days. But if I did, I would probably consider myself like a pantheist. Basically thinking that if you want to use a Star Wars reference, you can talk about the Force. If you want to talk about Taoism, which I'm not fully educated in, but the way or the path, which, I mean, there's a lot of context for Taoism too. So I wouldn't, besides not having read a whole lot and steeped in the values, is also a product of, or at least the Taoist texts that I'm familiar with are like a product of Imperial China and and like has its own context in terms of like when it's appropriate for people to adopt the values, at what age, like they're allowed to believe these certain things. It talks about like the best kind of king is a king who rules in this manner. And I'm like, oh, I don't really want any kings. But like a pantheist basically says, like everything has the potential for holiness. Holiness is not anything separate from reality and from our everyday experience, I guess. And therefore it should all be allowed to be as it wants to be. And it's wrong for someone to impose on another person. That's not to say like it's wrong for a lion to take down a gazelle, but there's a relationship between them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's not wrong for a spider to take a fly. It's not wrong for like someone to accidentally like step on a blade of grass. But there's got to be this like give and take relationship that's a sense of responsibility sort of between them.
You know, what you just said is what makes me always been fascinated with Jainism. And I've always wanted to learn more and study it more, but I just honestly haven't had a chance. I know there's a Jain community in Arizona, a pretty big Jain community in Arizona that I've always wanted to go visit. But their stance that they take on all that, it seems pretty extreme to me personally.
They don't live very long, from what I understand.
You know, I've never looked into that aspect of it before.
Because the whole like fruitarian thing of like, well, if it like, well, you know, if it falls off a tree,
it has
then
to
it's
fall
okay for me
in.
to eat.
And I know there's certain levels of it, just like in any other sort of theology. But I've also heard that most of the kids that are raised Jain are only Jain in their household.
Huh.
And then as they get older, they kind of get more entrenched in it, like almost like more conservative in it. And it's like this revolving thing that you only are like super into it when you're older.
Huh.
But
in the meantime, they sort of like walk away like a lot of Amish, I guess. Probably do. Like they go English and then come back maybe later on in life.
Yeah, that's from my limited understanding of talking to like 4 people.
It's more than I know.
I think pretty much the only reason why I identify as an atheist is because I'm without theism, which is the most basic,
I mean,
what it is.
I classify myself as an atheist, but that's because I'm coming from that, Judeo-Christian background. And it's a way of me expressing to my peers in that no, I believe you're wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. But like, if there was something like theism, like that's outside of theism, I could still be atheist, like you were saying.
Yeah.
I could be without theism and still believe that there's a path to follow, which I don't necessarily believe that there is a one path to follow, but
Yeah, it's not necessarily exclusive, I guess.
Well,
I think that specifically for me, like not taking the term atheist is kind of it feels to me like in the same way as with the Satanists. Like I spent so much of my life with this Christian God stuck in my head that I'm just over it, and I want to not relate to it. It's funny because I'll make a bunch of Catholic jokes throughout. Like we can talk about rosemaries and we can talk about Hail Marys and whatever else. But I like went from Catholicism to trying to study Irish paganism for a while, and then I'm like, oh, this is interesting, and like, oh, this kind of still sucks. What else is there? There's, I don't know, druids. No, I don't want any druids. And like looked around long enough, and I was just like, something. It feels good to me to say words that seem important and pretend to have a relationship with the world around me. It feels good to me, like sit down quietly and observe things. That's all it has to be. But I really don't want to like sit down and just stick a different God in my head or stick the absence of God and my fist in the air and be like, fuck you, not God. And that's kind of like how I would feel if I called myself an atheist. I would still be engaging in that dialogue,
Yeah.
But
well, being raised in an extreme Mormon household, I feel like I have to really separate myself hard from that.
Well, living in this city, I feel
just living here. Yeah,
I feel like no, I am not anything like you. Just leave me alone.
Let's be clear on this.
Does that influence the way that you dress? Or like present in public?
You mean, do I wear like special clothing that I think is magical?
No, I mean anti-magical.
Oh,
anti-magical clothing. Do you wear like atheist shirts and stuff like that, or like Bad Religion, or
I don't.
What kind of
Jordi
reactions
does.
do you get? Oh, okay.
I don't really have.
You wear the
I have one
shirt.
that says "fuck you, God" on it. I guess.
Oh, that's cool.
But
you could really fuck with them by getting a Pope hat. You know.
What's really interesting, I think, out here, if you're not, from that Christian background or specifically Mormon background, you really try to be anti and counterculture to that. And so anyone who's not really sticks together, and they like to show it. So that it's a lot more body modification. It's a lot more overtness towards those type of things. And when I was younger, I was definitely more overt and trying to be like, yeah, you can see that I have tattoos. Yeah, you can see I'm not wearing garments, or yeah, that type of thing.
And that way you can let other people know that you don't follow the mainstream religion here.
Yeah.
Without actually saying it.
Which I guess is useful in as far as like probably personal expression, but also to sort of like give an out to other folks and say like, it's okay. You can run. There's the fence. We'll cut a hole for you.
But
get away. No more special underwear.
It's also really interesting. I find myself now, that I'm in my mid-30s, when I'm, conversing with new people, the first thing I'm looking for is the telltale signs of like garments under their shirt. And it's just, so I know how I can, approach them in a setting that's not going to be confrontational sometimes.
I definitely change my, my language, at least around Mormons. I will not curse or things like that. I show some respect there, I guess. I don't know why. I think
it's just our upbringing.
Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah, I definitely change my way of interacting when I'm, depending on how I perceive the person that I'm interacting with. That's a pretty natural thing to do, I think. It does feel kind of weird though when it ends up reflecting the values that you were raised with, that you maybe, like if you're rejecting the whole like religion part of it, but at the same time you kind of defer to someone's cultural experience as being a Mormon or Christian or what have you. Not that anything's wrong with it. I'm not judging it, but it's just kind of funny how that plays out.
What I find interesting is that since I've been straight edge my entire life, a lot of people assume that was because of Mormon influence, and I don't know. Maybe it is. I haven't looked deep enough in that, but
I think it is for a lot of people.
Yeah, for sure. But we haven't even talked about your radio show. Like, what the hell?
Oh. Sorry. I apologize.
That's totally Jordan's fault. Fuck you, Jordan.
Yeah, sorry.
Way to steal the spotlight for the whole hour and 15 minutes.
Talk about anarchism bullshit.
So yeah, you do the final straw. How did that come about?
Well, I was doing a radio show, a music show with a couple of friends here at Asheville FM. Right after I moved to town, I needed a project to get involved in, and so my friends were already doing a radio show, and we did this thing called Doing Being, and that was Shantron and Bill Silverfox. And Doing Being was a reference to, I guess, like I think it was during some of the New School protests in New York. So, like, I don't know. This cop was interviewed by the media. And they're like, what are the protesters doing? And they're like, I don't know. They're just being. I don't know. Because they were occupying space, basically. But it was this kind of like play on like, oh, that cop actually said something kind of funny in terms of praxis. Like, cool. But so it was a music show that lasted a while. I wasn't getting what I wanted out of it. I kind of wanted to have like more of a political connection, because moving to Asheville from the Bay Area, I felt somewhat disconnected from the political circuits I was more familiar with. And so tried to turn that radio show into, we would have a weekly book club and discuss a book, and then like maybe record that, and that would be the show, maybe starting with some sci-fi and then some theory and whatever else. Never got off the ground. And eventually I just decided, well, I want to see if I can like engage in political discourse around ideas that are going on now by using this medium of this like local radio show. And I've loved radio since I didn't actually have like a stereo system growing up, but I was able to access radio. And so like listen to for a while, really good hip hop in the Bay Area and oldies and rock music and whatever else. And also a lot of politics on KPFA. I just kind of wanted to, actually, specifically, I was trying to reproduce some of the model of Against the Grain, which comes out through the Pacifica Network from KPFA. It's a great show. It airs, I think, 3 times a week. And it's hour-long interviews with 1 to 2 people. I'm not always interested in the content. Some of it's a bit too Marxist for me, or liberal, or progressive. I wanted to hear something like that for anarchism. And so that's kind of where that project came out of.
And so you've also done some work with Crime Thinks?
I helped out Crime Thinks with their podcast for a few episodes, doing some of the production work for them. Just like trying to use whatever experience I had to help them get off the ground. And now they're running full bore, which is great. Their show has a lot of really good content to it. And it's definitely like, yeah, they've got a nice network of folks all sharing the work. And it definitely, that quality comes out in their podcasts.
Well, how can people follow your work and get in contact with you?
Well, you can find archives of The Final Straw at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, where they appear a week after airing. You can find up-to-date episodes that can stream from ashevillefm.org, the current week's episode. You can also go to Radio for All, and you could podcast off of that site if you want to, and that's a great resource for all sorts of mostly politically minded, but not necessarily political, like radio shows produced around the world, mostly in English, for any radio station to pick up for free. You can contact me at The Final Straw Radio at riseup.net. And yeah, if we're always looking for folks to talk about what's going on, what they're interested in, ideas, struggles, especially. I like hearing about struggles and getting to chat with people that are involved in ecological resistance or land projects or strikes or prisoner support or what have you. And this week and last week, the show is basically just metal and punk. So if you like metal and punk, that's what we got for you.
Sweet. Well, we end every episode saying "fuck, shit, damn." Would you mind ending us for it this week?
I would love to. Do we do it all in unison, or
it's all you?
Oh wow! Okay. Let me just stretch real fast. Fuck, shit, damn.
Awesome. Sweet. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Is that? Are you going to be? Are you saving those up to like put together a rap album with all your guests?
We really should.
I've never actually thought about it
or electronica would be better actually.
I should totally go through the past 99 episodes or 100 episodes and do that.
Yeah. Fuck shit, damn. Fuck shit, damn.
Some of them are pretty funny too, actually.
So like one person was like, "Fuck you, blah 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 blah. I'm gonna shit on your face. Damn you to hell." I'm like, wow, you really got into that.
Yeah, it's a way to whip it out, just like real quickly. That's cool.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay,
you all have a great day.
You too.
Good talking to you, Gordon.
Yeah, for real.
Nice to meet you, Jeremy. Bye.
This week you heard
Bug Buzz by AMB.
Right now you're listening to
Loophole by Digital Rust.
And as always, El Comandantes, which side are you on?
I'm sure you heard the footage or saw the film of them doing Which Side Are You On from Mike Brown, right?
Yeah, we actually posted it on our social media.
I heard about it also on NPR. I loved it. I loved hearing people say it. I loved the whole action. I loved the symphony's response to it. Mm-hmm. They were actually in support of it.
And they clapped and applauded.
Yeah.
There was a few scummy people in the audience, but other than that, there was a lot of support in the audience.
A lot of support. And in the orchestra itself. Yeah.
Which, by interrupted, they didn't actually interrupt.
It was right before a requiem that they were going to do.
Yeah, so it was called a requiem for Mike Brown. I think that was really beautiful, and that's what I love so much about Which Side. It's just so fucking applicable to everything.
The conductor actually said the whole thing was very healing. He felt the whole thing was very healing.
Cool.
Yeah, which is great for someone who's being interrupted in a,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, what can you say?
Anyways, I just wanted to throw it in there. You said it, and it reminded me of it.
Yeah, and which I could segue into. Follow us on our social media. You can find out about that kind of stuff. We post stuff like that all the time. So like us, friend us, all that jazz. Whichsidepodcast.com. Click on social. Also, not to beat a dead carrot, but please rate and review us on iTunes if you haven't done so. It really helps us, and it helps us get our name out there. It helps other people find us.
And you know what? This is what's really awesome right now. If you know anyone who has the new iPhone OS, the podcast app comes standard, which means that everyone has it regardless of listening to a podcast. So what you need to do, if someone has the new OS, just say, hey, let me borrow your phone, and subscribe us to it. Give them that gift.
They'll love it. Or hate it.
And then they can delete it. But give them that gift. Everyone has it. So just be like, hey man, let me see your phone. Open it, subscribe.
And if you're not subscribed to us yet, please do so. Buy our fucking shirt. Fuck shit, damn.
Which Side is produced by the Which Side Media Collective.